Still with us? You're listening to Boring Tales. And the sun has shifted again, the patterns have settled. And Lucus, the mosaic maker, returns quietly to his day. The room remains calm. The stones still wait. Let's return now to the next slow chapter of his quiet life. And so he kept going. Stone after stone, pause after pause, breath after breath. He lost track of time. Not because it escaped him, but because it simply didn't matter. The rhythm didn't require the hour. Only his hands. His stillness. And the way the colors spoke without ever speaking aloud. When he finally looked up, the light had shifted. Not much. Just enough to suggest that morning was drifting into noon. The curve was nearly full now. And Lucas? He felt fuller too. Not busy. Not proud. Just quietly present. Like the stones themselves. The room had grown warmer. Not hot. But wrapped in a kind of weightless warmth, the kind that presses gently against the skin without asking anything in return. The light from the high window had shifted again, longer now, leaning in from the west, casting golden shapes onto the floor and across the curve Lucas had been building. He sat back slowly, the wooden stool creaking beneath him, a familiar sound in a familiar moment. His eyes lingered on the last row of tesserae. It was enough for now. The curve was complete. Or at least this part of it. A quiet form of motion, held still in stone. There would be more added later, more around it, beyond it, within it, but not now. Lucas stood, his back stiff from leaning, his hands marked with the dry dust of mortar and the soft color of stone. He didn't brush them clean just yet. He liked the feeling. It reminded him that the work was real. Simple. Physical. His. He stepped away from the slab. No rush. No sudden movement. Only quiet steps, bare feet across the stone floor. He walked to the narrow window set into the thick wall above the workbench, the window he'd built himself when he first moved into this home. He liked how it never showed the street. Only the rooftops, and the sky beyond. Today, the sky was pale. A soft blue, nearly silver at the edges, where a few faint clouds drifted without urgency. He rested his hands on the windowsill. It was cool beneath his fingers, the stone holding the morning chill even as the sun warmed the wall. He leaned forward just enough to feel the light on his cheek. Closed his eyes. The sounds of the street were far below, a vendor's cart, a child's quiet song, a distant broom brushing the step of a neighbor. But inside this small upper room, there was only breath. And warmth. And the settling of dust. Lucas stayed there a while. He wasn't thinking about the design. Not about which pattern would grow next, or what the curve might become. He wasn't planning. Not sketching, not imagining. Just being. The work had rhythm. But so did rest. The pause was part of the pattern too. And here, beneath the window, that pause deepened. A pigeon cooed from somewhere on the roof. A leaf tumbled from a tree just beyond the wall. He could not see it. But he imagined it, drifting down in slow circles toward the garden below. He remembered, faintly, his father pausing like this, not during work, but between it. Hands in clay. Then quiet. A slow walk to the doorway, to the window, to a bench in the sun. Lucas had learned the rhythm, not from instruction, but from watching. From being near. He opened his eyes. Let them wander across the rooftops, the scattered chimneys, the shifting light. The dust on his arms caught the sun, sparkling faintly, not brightly, but enough to feel like proof that the morning had meant something. He turned slowly. Looked back at the slab. The ribbon of color, the curve of pattern, the scattered stones still waiting in the trays around the edges. There was more to do. Always more. But not yet. Not this moment. He would return. He always did. But for now, he stayed still. Breathing. Listening. Letting the silence fold around him like a soft, familiar cloth. And above him, the sunlight continued its quiet path across the stone. Lucus had not expected anyone today. But in the stillness of the early afternoon, as the dust settled and the curve of tesserae cooled under slanting light, he heard them. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Uncertain. Wooden soles brushing against stone steps, not hurried, not loud, but purposeful. As if the one walking was hoping not to interrupt, and yet needed to arrive. Lucus did not move right away. He let the sound come to him, listening as the rhythm of the stairwell folded into the silence of his room. The stairs were narrow, spiraling up from the courtyard through a corridor lined with old limewash and potted herbs. They creaked differently beneath different feet. And these, he recognized. Eventually. A quiet breath left his lips. He wiped his hands on a worn cloth, then turned slowly toward the door. No knock. Just a pause. Then the sound of fingers brushing lightly against the old wooden frame. Lucus stepped forward and opened it. There stood Tullius. His apprentice. Young, but not new. He'd been coming for nearly 2 seasons now, twice each week. Always early, always quiet, always careful. Tullius held a small bundle under one arm, wrapped in coarse brown linen, its corners tied in a knot the way Lucus had shown him. He offered no words at first, only a glance. Not of worry, but of uncertainty. Lucus stepped aside. Said nothing. Just nodded. Once. And Tullius entered. The room, already still, grew even quieter. As though it was listening too. Tullius moved carefully, his sandals making only the softest tap against the worn floor. He placed the bundle gently on the side bench and looked at the slab where Lucas's mosaic curved softly inward, the ribbon of stone winding like a resting vine. Lucus watched him. He said no praise, no greeting, no correction. Only, after a long moment, "You came." Tullius nodded. "Yes. I thought it might be time." Lucus returned to his stool, motioned gently for Tullius to join him. Another stool was kept nearby, shorter, less worn, but steady. The boy sat. His hands rested quietly on his knees, and his eyes moved over the design, not in wonder, not in haste, but with the kind of attention that grows from quiet repetition. Lucus picked up a stone, a simple grey piece, smooth, rectangular. He passed it silently to Tullius. The boy turned it over once, then held it still in his palm. Lucus murmured, almost as if talking to himself, "Edges tell you nothing. But shape tells you where it wants to go." Tullius nodded again. He did not answer. He did not need to. Outside, a breeze moved through the high window. The curtain shifted softly. Inside, 2 quiet souls looked down at a mosaic, one learning to speak its language, the other remembering how long it had taken to hear it himself. They sat in silence. Not awkward, not strained, but soft, like linen hanging in still air. Tullius, with the small grey tessera resting in his palm, watched as Lucus reached for another. No instructions were given. None were needed. Lucus did not believe in hurrying toward understanding. He believed in repetition. In presence. In the slow unfurling of patterns, not just in stone, but in people. The elder craftsman placed the tessera down, pressing it gently into the mortar, turning it slightly to nestle its edge against the curve. The motion was simple. Almost nothing. But Tullius watched it as if it were everything. Lucus didn't look up. He placed another. Then another. Each one chosen without hesitation. But never rushed. The tray to his right held a variety of shapes, pale ochre, muted blue, soft white, and occasional flecks of rose. Each stone bore some imperfection. A chipped edge, a slanted base, a ridge across its face that would catch the light just so when set against its neighbors. Lucus reached into the tray again, fingers moving gently over the pieces, pausing, selecting, lifting. Tullius leaned slightly closer, his eyes narrowing just a little. He was not trying to memorize the pattern. He was watching how it breathed. How Lucus moved between decisions and pauses. Lucus finally spoke, his voice low. As if not wanting to disturb the stones, "You don't force the curve," he said, as he pressed a soft ochre piece into place. "You. Listen to it." Tullius glanced down at the design. At the soft sweep of pale color that now bent gently through the darker stones. Lucus placed another. The sound of mortar squishing gently beneath his fingertip was the only reply. Then, without looking up, Lucus added, "Even your breath can shift a stone before the mortar sets." Tullius breathed more softly. He hadn't realized how loud his own stillness could feel. They sat like that for a long time. Minutes. Or more. The curve extended slowly. The palette remained soft, no sudden contrasts, no interruptions. Only the quiet placement of one voiceless piece after another. And Tullius, still holding the grey tessera, never once asked where it should go. Lucus was teaching, but not explaining. He was showing how a rhythm becomes a language. How patience becomes a path. How a young boy becomes part of the silence by choosing not to fill it. A pigeon cooed again above the roof. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, a clay pot tipped gently in the breeze. Lucus reached once more, fingertips brushing across the tray. He picked up a soft white piece, then paused. And passed it to Tullius. This time, the boy said nothing. He simply nodded. Lucus gestured, barely, toward the curve. Tullius leaned forward. Gently. Carefully. And placed the stone. Not perfectly. But thoughtfully. Lucus did not correct him. The mortar accepted the piece. The pattern continued. The air had warmed. Just a little. The mortar in the bowl was beginning to set along the edges, not yet hard, but no longer loose. Lucus moved the tray closer to where the curve was forming. Then stood slowly, stretching his back in silence. Tullius remained seated, still holding the soft white stone he had placed just minutes before. Lucus spoke only 2 words. Words he often used, but never hurried, "Keep going." Then he stepped away. Not far. Just enough. Enough to let the boy feel the weight of choosing. Tullius looked down at the pattern. It was no longer just Lucas's. Not now. The curve. The bend of it. Waited. He reached for another tessera, not the grey one, but a small blue piece, faintly veined, its top slightly uneven. He turned it in his hand, then set it down beside the last stone Lucas had placed. It didn't sit flush. Not quite. He lifted it again. Turned it. Tried a different angle. Lucas had nothing. Tullius pressed it in. Softly. His finger resting there a moment longer than it needed to. Then he reached again. Piece by piece, he built on the curve. Slowly. Carefully. A pale ochre. Then a soft cream. Then one with a speck of rust near the edge. Each tessera added brought a small breath of confidence. Lucus remained quiet, behind him now, cleaning a few of the older tools with a cloth soaked in vinegar and ash. He didn't watch. Not directly. But he listened. He could hear the mortar being pressed, the pause between pieces, the small clink as a tessera was chosen, then set back down because it didn't feel quite right. This, more than instruction, was learning. Tullius worked until the tray's top layer was nearly gone. He sat back, exhaled softly through his nose, and wiped his hands on the hem of his tunic. Lucus returned. He stood beside the curve. Gazed down at the new section. Said nothing. For a long moment. Then. He pointed to one tessera placed just slightly askew. Not wrong. Just. Unbalanced. Lucus didn't move to fix it. He simply looked at Tullius, and raised one brow. The boy understood. He lifted it again, smoothed the mortar, and tried a different piece. This one sat more comfortably. Almost as if it had been waiting for the boy to find it. Lucus gave a quiet sound, not a word, not quite approval, but something like it. A grunt of agreement. Then, he returned to his stool. Letting the silence resume. Together, they continued. 2 hands. Placing stones in soft rhythm. Not rushing. Not explaining. Just. Helping. As the sun eased lower in the sky, and the workshop grew quieter still, the stones told their story. Not in color, not in shape, but in the time it took to place each one with care. The mortar had stiffened. The final tessera for the day had found its place. Lucas leaned back on his stool and let the silence settle once more. No more work today. No more curves to guide. He rubbed the mortar from his palms with a bit of warm cloth, then dipped his fingers into a shallow bowl of cool water, once, twice, as he had every afternoon for years. The sky beyond the window arch was softening, not yet dusk, but no longer full day. That gentle in-between when the shadows seem quieter. Lucas stood. His knees complained softly, as they often did. But he moved with the certainty of routine. Tullius had already tidied the tools, set the bowl aside, and placed the cloths in a folded heap. Lucas gave him a small nod. No instruction. Just a shared understanding. They walked together, out through the narrow back corridor, where mint grew in cracks between worn stones. Then down a short stair that opened into the enclosed garden. A small square of space. High walls. Warm stone. And a bench. Under a fig tree. The leaves stirred gently. The air held a scent, not strong, but earthy, like dust and old wood. Lucas sat. Slowly. Deliberately. Tullius joined him. Not too close. Just near enough. Between them, a small woven tray rested on the bench. Inside, a round loaf of bread, cool from the morning's bake. A handful of black olives, salted and wrinkled from the jar. A small wedge of goat's cheese, still firm. No feast. No ceremony. Just enough. Lucas broke the bread in two. Gave the larger half to Tullius without a word. The boy accepted it with the same silence. They ate slowly. Chewing without haste. Not filling silence, only sharing it. The olives were bitter. The bread was coarse. The cheese held the faint taste of wild herbs from the grazing hills. Each flavor. Simple. Honest. Unrushed. A pigeon settled on the garden wall. Its feathers fluffed. It blinked once. Then closed its eyes. Tullius took an olive, turned it in his fingers before eating. Lucas reached for a second piece of bread. The breeze stirred again, carrying the sound of a neighbor's broom scraping the street in slow, even strokes. The kind of sound that doesn't ask for attention. The kind that simply exists. Lucas sighed quietly. Not from effort. Just habit. He leaned back against the stone wall, closed his eyes a moment. Not sleeping. Not quite. Just resting. Tullius said nothing. He didn't need to. They sat that way until the tray was nearly empty. Until the last crumb rolled gently between two fingers and was brushed softly to the ground. The garden, the food, the day, all had been enough. The fig leaves rustled. Not much. Just enough to let you know the air had cooled. Lucas remained on the bench, his spine relaxed now, hands resting loosely in his lap. His eyes half closed, as if watching without looking. Tullius stayed beside him, legs stretched slightly, heels resting on smooth stone. He traced the edge of the empty tray with one finger, slowly. As though the wood had a story he hadn't heard yet. The light deepened. Grew warmer. Slid down the garden walls in long, golden streaks that made even rough surfaces glow. Shadows moved. But without urgency. They didn't chase, didn't stretch. They simply shifted. Lucas opened his eyes again, but only partway. He glanced at the small clay pot on the ground beside the bench, home to a young rosemary shrub. It wasn't thriving, but it wasn't failing either. He'd meant to water it yesterday. He might remember tomorrow. Tullius stood slowly, walked across the garden, and ran his hand along the low wall, his fingers brushing dried vines that had curled and crisped in last month's heat. Lucas watched him. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't instruct. This was part of learning too. Moving quietly through spaces that did not need words. The sun had dipped behind the rooftops now. Only the sky remained lit, a soft, diluted orange drifting toward blue. The garden took on that peculiar calm that belongs only to places where nothing important is expected to happen. Tullius returned, sat cross-legged on the ground. Picked up a small leaf from between the stones. Held it to the light. Turned it. Let it fall again. Lucus closed his eyes fully this time. The kind of rest that doesn't lead to sleep, but rests in its direction. In the quiet, a cicada clicked once. Then again. A second one joined, from farther off, near the street. Their rhythm was uncoordinated, but somehow complete. Tullius yawned. The kind of yawn he tried to hide, but didn't need to. Lucus heard it. Said nothing. Only shifted his weight slightly, adjusting his shoulder against the stone. The bench creaked softly. A familiar sound. A sound that had belonged to many evenings, many apprentices, many final hours of quiet, forgettable days. Tullius looked up at the fig tree, its branches black now against the deepening sky. A single fruit hung low. Not yet ripe, but promising. The boy didn't reach for it. He only watched. Waited. As if something might change. But he would not be the one to cause it. Lucus finally stirred. Rubbed his hands together, more out of habit than need. Then he opened his eyes again, just enough to see the last light touch the top of the wall. "We should bring the tray in," he said. His voice was barely a murmur. Tullius nodded. But neither of them moved. Not yet. They would wait a little longer. Until the light was truly gone. Until the night air had arrived. Until even the fig tree seemed to sleep. The tray still rested on the bench. The bread was gone, the olives too, but the scent lingered faintly, olive brine, a whisper of cheese, and warm wood. Gathered into the folds of the air as the night settled in. Lucus leaned forward slightly, reaching for the tray, but his hands stopped halfway, resting instead on his knees. He breathed in. Then out. And waited. Tullius had laid back on the stone, arms beneath his head, watching the stars emerge one by one. Not quickly. Not all at once. But like shy guests arriving for a gathering no one would speak at. First, a single bright one. Then another. Then a faint dusting so soft it almost wasn't there. Lucus did not look up. He didn't need to. He had seen these stars before, from this very spot, in this very season. Still, they brought something with them. Something familiar. And gently forgotten. The walls of the garden had become soft with darkness. The fig tree, now just a shape, a form against the deeper sky. The bench cooled beneath him. The stones at his feet gave back the heat they had held all day. And now slowly released, as if exhaling after holding breath for too long. A moth brushed past. It circled once near the rosemary before vanishing into the shadows. Lucus finally rose. Not fast. Not slow. Just. As he always did. He reached for the tray, and this time he lifted it, one hand beneath, the other steadying the rim. The weight was nothing. But the gesture mattered. Tullius sat up. He brushed dust from his back, though it wasn't needed. And stood. Together, they walked, not in conversation, not in silence exactly, but in something in between. Where words are no longer required. The corridor greeted them with a scent of cooled stone and the faintest trace of yesterday's olive oil. A single oil lamp burned on a ledge inside, its wick low, its flame steady. Lucus set the tray gently on the shelf by the door. Tullius stood nearby, waiting. Still. Present. Lucus turned slightly, his hand resting on the doorframe. And then, in the most ordinary tone, tomorrow. The green border. Tullius nodded. Yes. He did not ask when. He did not ask how. He would know. The boy turned, made his way toward the stair. Each step soft, measured. Just like earlier in the day. Lucus watched him go until the sound of footsteps was gone. Not even an echo now. Just the lamp. The tray. The scent of garden leaves on the evening air. And Lucas. Still standing. Still listening. Not for anything specific. Just listening. To the quiet sweep of the day as it completed itself. Not with a sigh. Not with a closing. But with a stillness so complete. It asked for nothing more. He stepped inside. Closed the door softly. And let the night take over. Stone by stone. Shadow by shadow. Breath by breath. The morning was pale. A quiet kind of brightness that belonged only to early hours before voices had found their place, before any broom had swept the thresholds, before the heat rose to claim the air. Lucas stood near the entrance to the workroom, just beside the wide stone column that caught the first light. He didn't move at first. He only looked. At the motes of dust drifting lazily in the angled sunbeam. At the floor, already marked with faint footprints from yesterday's work. He carried a damp cloth in one hand, and a rolled scroll in the other. The scroll was unimportant, just sketches, measurements, notes scratched in charcoal for the day's next border curve. But the cloth would be used. Again and again. To clean. To smooth. To prepare. He walked the perimeter of the room once. Just once. And listened to the sound of his own sandals against the stone, a faint scuff. Then pause. Then another. Tullius had not yet arrived. But Lucas did not check the hour. The boy would come. He knelt, one knee down, the cloth resting in his palm, and began wiping the rim of the mixing bowl from yesterday's mortar. There was no rush. Only motion. Small. Circular. Motions. The door behind him creaked. Not the quick lift of Tullius' step. Not the clatter of a neighbor. But something. Deliberate. He turned his head slowly, not startled, just noting. In the archway stood a figure. Robes of soft rust brown, a hand resting on a carved walking stick with an ivory inlay near the top. It was Gaius Varenius. The patron. The man whose coin made the mosaic exist. Whose vision paid for the pattern that Lucas had spent months unfolding stone by stone. Lucas stood. Wiped his hands on the cloth. And inclined his head, not deeply, not out of fear, but out of practiced respect. Gaius, he said, his voice soft, even. The older man stepped inside, his sandals careful on the stone. He walked as one who had known pain in his knees for years, and who no longer bothered to conceal it. I see the third border is nearly done, he said, gazing at the floor without smiling. Lucas nodded. There are 3 more tiles before the green meets the arc. Gaius stepped closer. Bent slowly, resting both hands on his stick. He looked. Not at the mosaic, but at Lucas' hands. They're steady, he said. As always. Lucas did not reply. He only waited. Let the space stay open. Gaius straightened again, winced slightly, exhaled slowly. You'll live long, he added. Men with steady hands often do. Lucas turned toward the work table. Lifted the scroll. Unrolled it. I adjusted the leaf pattern here, he said, pointing to a faint curve near the corner of the design. It softens the transition between the vine and the spiral. Gaius leaned over, studied it in silence. A long silence. The kind that held weight, but not necessarily judgment. At last, he nodded. Once. It pleases me, he said. Then, after another pause, and it pleases the gods when a craftsman respects the pattern more than his own name. Lucas rolled the scroll closed. The moment hovered. Long enough to mark the day. Short enough not to interrupt it. Gaius turned, began his slow walk to the door again. And just before passing through it, he stopped. Will it be ready? By the festival? Lucas looked up. Yes. No flourish. No boast. Just a fact. The older man gave no reply. Only nodded again. Then. He was gone. The door closed with a whisper of wood against stone. Lucas stood for a moment longer. Then returned to the bowl. Lifted the cloth. And resumed his work. Circular. Small. Careful. The door had long since closed. And with it, the echo of the patron's footsteps had faded into silence. Lucus remained standing by the work table, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the scroll. It had uncurled slightly, edges no longer crisp, softened from weeks of touch. And sun. And quiet corrections made one by one in pencil and dust. The light had shifted slightly. It now filtered through the open archway at a new angle, stretching long lines of gold across the stones of the workshop floor. Lucus took the scroll in both hands. Lifted it gently, as one might lift the corner of a tapestry to peer beneath. And carried it to the stool by the north wall, his preferred spot when the morning was still fresh but the sun had found the edges of the tiles. The stool creaked softly as he settled. Wood bending, but not protesting. The scroll stretched across his lap, held down on one side by a smooth river stone, his marker of choice. Small, dark, and comfortably round. It had no sharp edges. Only the kind that fit neatly into a palm without needing to be gripped. He reached for the charcoal stick, dull, worn at one end. Its point was not sharp, but he didn't need sharpness. Just contact. Just weight. The adjustment was subtle. In the curl of a vine, where it met the second border. Too tight. He had thought yesterday. It pinched the flow. So today, he relaxed it, just slightly. Widened the arc. Allowed more space between leaf and line. His fingers moved slowly. Not sketching. But guiding. Letting the shape reveal itself without forcing it. Like following the path of a lazy river bend you've walked many times before. Each curve. A breath. Each mark. A pause. Each adjustment. A whisper between materials. He set the charcoal down. Brushed the scroll with the back of his hand. The dust lifted easily. And what remained was the new shape, so slight, it might not be noticed by anyone but him. But it mattered. Behind him, the faintest sound of movement, the creak of a bucket handle, the soft shuffle of sandals against smooth stone. Tullius had arrived. No words. Just presence. Lucus didn't turn. He didn't need to. He simply spoke, his voice calm. The third vine has been widened. Tullius walked slowly to the table. Set the bucket down with a soft thud. Then waited. Lucus lifted the scroll once more, rose from the stool, and brought it back to the table where the stones were waiting. Side by side, the boy and the master stood, examining the line. Tullius looked. His eyes followed the arc without blinking. Then, a slow nod. "It's better," he said quietly. As if the vine is breathing. Lucus had nothing. But a slow breath moved through his chest. As though the compliment were not heard, but simply shared. He picked up the stone bowl. Swirled the small amount of remaining mortar. Set it down. 3 more stones, he said. Then the green band is complete. Tullius nodded again. Reached for the basket that held the small green tesserae, each one already chosen, already shaped. Lucus knelt. Took the trowel. Scooped a quiet mound of soft mortar onto the waiting floor. And together, in silence, they began again. 1 stone. Then another. Then the last. You've just listened to another quiet hour in the slow, silent world of Lucus the Mosaic Maker. The patterns are forming. Slowly. Steadily. And the day drifts on. Let your breath stay soft, your thoughts remain still. And when you're ready, we'll begin again, with the final part of this deeply uneventful story. Here, in Boring Tales.